Sorry if you were watching that. I know that we have some issues sometimes with Zoom and recording. So this is what I was talking to if you couldn't see it on my other screen, but you're going to be in zip forms and you're going to go to summary. You mainly want to make sure it's the street address, the city, state, zip code, county, and the assessor's parcel number. Assessor's parcel number will be listed even if you're finding it on Zillow. The rest of the stuff you do not need to worry about because if you try to plug it in, it'll mess up the rest of the contract a lot of times. But this is where you can put your buyer's information. It'll have your information. At this point for this specific deal, this has already closed. So my transaction coordinator who fills out the other documents came in and filled the rest of this stuff out. So I'm going to go to documents. None of this should be here. Sometimes the residential purchase agreement will automatically be here, but I'm going to go over here and I'm going to hit all forms and boom, it's right there. If I had a listing, I'm going to hit listing, right? So I'm going to come here. I'm going to open this document. I'm going to do open form in Classic Editor for now, just because this is how I know how to edit it. It's the same form. This is real estate agency relationship. Once again, you can read this, but this is just describing what an agency relationship means if you're representing seller, buyer, both seller and buyer, so many things. So this just covers a lot of that. Your buyer's information should already be in here. If you're in Southern California, you're representing a tenant, obviously it'd be tenant right here, but this is disclosing who we're representing. So we're representing the buyer. Their contact information should auto-populate. Otherwise, you're going to type it out here. Yes, that is the most insane last name ever. But this is where, remember, the broker is representing the clients, not the agent. The agent is an arm of the broker, but the broker is representing the client. So the broker is Vision Forward Realty Incorporated. If you're watching this, we have about a week or two before the brokerage license got approved. So you're probably putting Cameron Ripley as your managing broker, and you're putting my license number. This is where you're going to put your name and your license number. We scroll down. This just refers to a lot of codes. This is the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory. Once again, it goes over a lot of codes and it goes over what cannot be discriminated against when you're representing someone. So obviously, a for sale by owner property can discriminate however much they want. But as soon as an agent represents them, they cannot discriminate. Otherwise, the agent has to terminate the relationship. So obviously, it goes over a lot of things. Once again, your client's information. Now it says seller. Sometimes an agent will say in the private agent remarks, the seller's names are this. That's because they're lazy and they don't want to have to put it in themselves. So they want you to put it in. Most people don't care. So I leave that blank. It'll get filled in later when the seller fills in their own information. So once again, that will be blank. This will be filled out. This is where you do want to put the listing agent's brokerage, their license number, and that listing agent's name and their license number. You can even find this on Zillow. Usually you kind of have to scroll around to be able to find it. Don't click talk to an agent to figure it out. If you're filling this out before you have Zip Forms access and CAR login and you're just practicing, don't worry about it. Just leave it blank. Just do one, XYZ brokerage ABC agent and then write some weird number. Once again, wire fraud disclosure. Best way I can say this is I tell my clients, I will tell you who the escrow company is, and they will send an email with wire instructions. If you choose to wire it, they will ask that you call them first, just to double check that it's the right company. Then I'm going to start here. So this document, they made it super simple in 2022. It is 16 pages. The first 3 actually cover what you need to cover. The rest discloses and talks about everything to do with the first 3 pages, to be honest. Date prepared is going to be the date you prepare it. It is not the date that you submit it, because I'm going to be talking about details with my client. And so in court, they're going to reference the date that you prepared it. Don't worry about that. It's just the date you prepared it. Obviously, this is all going to be auto-populated because you filled it out in that first section. There's your assessor parcel number, there's your county, zip code, everything else. This should automatically get filled out without these boxes being checked. A lot of people will forget to check these boxes. So if this is the same brokerage representing both the buyer and seller, even if they're on a different real estate team within our brokerage, it's still dual agent. Because remember, the brokerage is representing these people, not necessarily the agent. So in this case, this Legacy Real Estate and Associates, I checked the seller and it auto checks that one. You see how I did that? Buyer, buyer. Perfect. I'm going to go down here. None of this needs to get mentioned. Purchase price, boom, purchase price. If it's all cash, I'm going to put that. Then I don't have to put anything about the loan over here. Close of escrow. You need to talk about this to the listing agent. How fast of a close do they want? Obviously, if the house is vacant, 1 + 1 = 2. You know, they want to close as fast as possible. But if it's occupied, you need to figure out how long of an escrow do they need and be respectful of that seller's time and how long they may need to move out. With your client, you want to talk about too, you know, hey, if you have to give your house or your apartment complex, your rental, a 60-day notice to vacate, a 60-day, then let's try to figure this out. However, you want to have a little bit of an overlap, like 3-week overlap between your rental and this. And that's okay because you never know when transactions get delayed for the weirdest things, and you'd rather have an overlap. So I'm going to go to the loan officer next, and I'm going to say, how quick of a close of escrow can we do? And they need to be very honest with you, and they need to be and you need to be honest with your client that if you do a faster than a 21-day close of escrow, or even a 21-day, they need to be on it. Whenever the loan officer asks for a document, they get it as fast as possible to them. So this one, we did a 15-day. You could pick a date. So I've had sellers who were closing on their house and we knew when that was going to close. We picked a date because we wanted it to be the very next day that they closed on their new home. And then they had a rent back. So they were able to take a week to move everything to the new home. So we just put a date, didn't worry about the time. Because if they accept this offer 2 days from now, that's when this time starts, versus a date is set in stone. But then again, remember, if the loan officer tells me I need 21 days and they accept my offer 3 days later, well, there goes 3 days, right? And you picked a date, there goes 3 days. We're now, you calculated 21, but we just lost 3 more days. So I can do an expiration of offer. If I'm trying to get someone to accept my offer before the weekend, that's where I'm going to put that. Initial deposit is not a security deposit. I will say that 5 or 6 times. It is referred to as the earnest money deposit, the EMD. This is what you're saying. Your client is saying, if I really break the contract, like I've removed all contingencies, we're supposed to sign, and I decide I'm not going to sign and I disappear, this is what I'm agreeing that you have to take me to court over in order to get this. We have to go to arbitration first, then we have to go to court. You don't just get this money. And a lot of people get very confused. I'm talking about the experienced agents. This is not a security deposit. I have seen it where people just say, hey, I don't want the house. I don't want the deposit. You just keep it. Okay. Typically a good earnest money deposit. Well, so it always is going to go towards the down payment and closing costs. Otherwise, if there is no stuff, right, it gets reimbursed back to the buyer at the end. But typically it's around 2%. Can't be more than 3% because the contract says it can't be more than 3%. Week ones are around 1%. Just if your client, if that's all the money they have, that's all the money they have. It's within 3 business days after acceptance by wire transfer, or I will typically type out buyer's choice. Keep in mind, if you don't type out buyer's choice, they can still go and drop off a personal check to the escrow company. Doesn't matter, honestly. Increased deposit, you could do this in odd situations where you need to do an increased deposit. So your client doesn't have the money now, but they're about to sell their property. Then they can do an increased deposit, or they want to put $1,000 now, and then they want to finish inspections and then increase it to $10,000, whatever they want to do. Loan amount. This is where you put, right, you're going to find out, are they putting 20% down, 15% down? This one was 25% down, so I just put the loan amount. Now, you could put this initial adjustable rate. Is it an adjustable rate mortgage? That's where I would do that. But fixed rate not to exceed. Typically, I'll find out, hey, what are the standard rates? And I'll put that. just know it doesn't make too much of a difference. And I'm wondering if they're going to take this out and change it. Buyer's points is the cost of getting the loan. And so a lot of this is you're getting this locked in as soon as the offer gets accepted. This is if you're locking it like 2 weeks into the contract, because if rates go up, your buyer doesn't qualify, then we're going to cancel. Or even if they do qualify, but rates went up, well, we put if rates do not exceed 6%, and they went up to 6 within the escrow period, so we're canceling. And then same thing with points. Now, if it's FHA, I'm going to check FHA. An addendum is going to pop up. It's the FHA VA addendum. Same thing, VA. There's seller financing. Other would be some weird one, USDA loan or something like that. Obviously, you can just read that. Additional financing. This would be a second mortgage. Typically, if my client is getting a down payment assistance, I'm not going to put that. So you can if you want, but you really kind of don't have to. But seller financing, I had one where they did seller financing if the house did not fully appraise. These will be auto-calculated. The down payment will be a little off because it's going to factor in the earnest money deposit in that as well, because it's pretty much like a cash to close. If you wanted to get a credit, this is where you can put it. You can also put it in an addendum at a later date as well. Additional financing terms, you could put all kinds of stuff here as well, but this is where you put any type of financing terms. Now, verification of all cash, down payment, this is all usually going to be submitted with a pre-approval letter. So you don't need to worry about checking this. You're going to submit it with, right here, I'm going to select pre-approval, and that's going to go along with our offer. I'm never going to submit an offer without a pre-approval letter or a proof of funds for cash offers. Final verification, I'll change this to like 2 days before close of escrow. So this is where you do a final walkthrough, and I just don't want a seller to go in and take a bunch of stuff. So we'll always do it like right before we close escrow. Just a final walkthrough. It's not contingent on the sale of the property. It's just to say, hey, if something's messed up, and it shouldn't be messed up, I'm going to take you to court because I'm going to call it out before we close escrow. And that's how you explain it to your clients. They take all the light bulbs, like something stupid. I've seen it where someone moved out and scratched the whole wall, and so they put it in the verification. Luckily, the seller went and fixed it, but they technically could have taken them to court if the seller chose not to fix it. Okay, loan and appraisal contingency. If you don't need a contingency, obviously you click no. Always ask the loan officer, how quick of a contingency do we need? They're the ones that make a decision on that, not your clients. That is what it is. Investigation of property. So typically I'm always trying to reduce this to, like right now in this market, 10 is good, but if I'm competing, I'm going to put 7. It's really hard to do it faster than that. But it's going to be your home, roof, pest inspection. If there's a septic tank, then that one. If there is a well, definitely a well inspection. You don't specify what inspections some brokerages require. We do not require it. And in fact, you can always talk to me about, hey, if they want you to sign a buyer inspection election addendum, I'm going to probably tell you no, because it brings up random inspections that it's just going to confuse your buyer, and I'm not going to have my buyer sign that. It's some made up document that some brokerages think they're super smart and put out there. I will always leave this one as 17 days, even if I shorten this one, because it needs to be like, I've had it where we removed our inspection contingency on day 7, and the seller was kind of pissed. And so my client wanted to go and do some measurements for some furniture, and they said no. I said, well, we actually are allowed access to your property within that 17-day period. It was super annoying, but this one, they already had inspections done. So we removed our inspection contingency altogether. So when we check that, the contingency removal form will be uploaded. And that's a totally different conversation. Review of seller documents. To be honest, when I shorten this, I'm going to shorten all of them. Keep in mind, all of these ones here, your client has 3 days from when they hand you in person those documents. So if they physically hand you the seller disclosures, you have 3 days to review them. let's say I put 7, they hand them to me on day 5. On day 8, I have to remove the contingency, or at least, accept those documents. Hopefully that makes sense, but we can talk about that another time. If they email it to you, so if they deliver it electronically, you have 5 days, which is very odd, to review them. So this is what typically happens is I move that as 7, and on day 7, the listing agent finally gets me these documents. Well, now I have an extra 5 days to review them, or my client has an extra 5 days to review them. You don't want to take 5 days, but right, you have 5 days. So that's just how it works. This is irrelevant. That can be a whole nother conversation. Time of possession, that's a whole nother conversation. I mean, it just depends. I've had it where people are like, well, we'll be out on this date. It's just so weird. They just made it more complicated, so we had to specify it here. Seller occupied or vacant. So if I offer, and always ask me about this, because when you get more than 29 days, it gets very tricky because the seller becomes a tenant of the property, and then they are subject to tenant laws, and they could squat on the house. So always talk to me before we do that so we can really advise your client. But otherwise, I could check this and an addendum, boom, addendum just popped up. So if I'm offering a rent back, I'll do a 7 days. You can either make it free or you can include principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, and you can specify all of that. Once again, whole nother conversation. Same thing, tenants. If tenants are living in it and they say, hey, the tenant is going to move out, then I'm going to attach some type of tenant occupancy addendum that says when they're moving out so that my client doesn't get screwed over with a squatting tenant. Seller delivery of documents, never change that. You want them to have all the time in the world to give you the documents. That way it delays your ability to cancel. Like, you want more time for your client, technically. You want them to make a decision when it comes to repairs. So you really want to shorten the inspection contingency. You just don't want another house to come on the market that looks the exact same, and now they're debating about, which I've had it, where they canceled and lost out on both houses, and it sucked. And then the next house they got was not as nice as either one of the other two. So this stuff, just honestly, you just leave it. So then we're going to come down. Now, remember in your coursework, if you take a house and you were to flip it upside down and shake the shit out of that, anything that falls out is personal property. Anything that stays is fixed to the property and belongs with the property. So curtain rods would technically belong to the property. Now, if you are confused what might just stay with the property, put it there. Every single time, put it there. There's pool equipment, put that shit there. Like, anything that you can kind of think of. Sometimes you can talk to the listing agent and they'll say, hey, they want to leave this stuff, but we'll put it on a separate addendum. I would do like personal furniture on a separate addendum. You don't want the bank to think that they're buying this kind of stuff. This stuff is irrelevant, right? It's just, the bank isn't worried about that. But if you start putting couches on here, tables, I would just do it on a separate addendum. The bank doesn't have to see or worry about. It's just, this is what we're focused on, because otherwise it's going to look like you're financing couches and tables. So, but this stuff needs to be included. Always just call the listing agent, ask, are they leaving the stove? Are they leaving the refrigerator? If your client wants it, then put it in. Fine, then we're putting it in. But you can always ask your client that too. You do have to ask if you don't put like, let's say they're like, I don't want the refrigerator, and you don't check it, still got to ask for them to remove it. Just because you didn't want it doesn't mean they don't have to get rid of it. Which you can put that in other terms, or just anywhere where there's extra terms to write something. So natural hazards, it's typical that the seller pays for it, but remember, nothing is actually typical. Everything is negotiable. I just typically will put seller, provided by, seller's choice. They order it anyway, environmental, and so they get to choose, and I'll just put seller's choice. No one, like, for negotiation purposes, no one ever says, oh, we don't want to pay for that, right? Now, smoke alarms, I will always put seller. The buyer shouldn't have to pay for damn smoke alarms and carbon dioxide detectors. Now, government required point of sale inspection reports. This is a whole nother conversation. It's also another word for retrofit. So like in the city of Davis, They have to have inspectors come out to make sure that there isn't too much water in the toilet, because they're low flow toilets, low flow shower heads. It's part of water conservation in the city of Davis and in Berkeley and like one other city in California. So agents will lose their mind, listing agents, if you put seller, even though if there's no retrofit, it's not required, no one has to pay for it. Like if I go down and I check city transfer tax, seller pay for it, and guess what? If there is no city transfer tax, guess how much the seller has to pay for it? Zero. But every listing agent loses their mind if you put seller and there is no. They're like, there is no, you can't put in the contract. Just put if applicable, if you just don't know. So next thing I go down to is I can either put buyer, seller for escrow fees. It's very common to split everything. Most of us are going to use a net sheet from a title company. I prefer Fidelity. If you're new, you may not have access to them yet, but you can have an app by them. And I can do a net sheet to show my client, if we're splitting it 50-50, this is how much you get. So 50-50 split, I'm going to hit both. 50-50 split is what I'm going to type out. Now, I already knew because they pre-opened. They put on the private remarks, escrow is pre-opened with Old Republic title. If I could tell it's a brand new agent and they say, I don't really have a preference. Like when I call and I say, hey, what title company are you going to work with? And they say, oh, I don't really have a preference. Then I'm going to put my own because I trust my escrow officer. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to put seller's choice. So same thing, owner's title insurance policy. You can either have your buyers pay for it in a competitive market. In a really down market, you can have the seller pay for it. If you're just competing a little bit, 50-50 split. It's like $1,200, $1,500, depending. But once again, seller's choice, or it'll be the same escrow and title company. Now, county transfer tax, there's always a county transfer tax. Very typical to do 50-50 split. Once again, competitive market, buyer should pay for it. Make sure you check, because I had it where it was $5,000 and I did not realize. I thought it'd be like $2,000, but luckily the lender gave a credit to the buyer. So it was fine. You could do seller in a competitive, like in a market like we're in now. If it's down, I might do that. But if I know it's like 2,000 total, I would rather them give us a $10,000 credit and me just put 50-50 split on these three things, so it just looks better on paper. Right, city transfer tax, you could put seller if applicable, just in case. Private transfer, there, like Lennar Title does a transfer fee. It's like 0.05% of the purchase price, and it goes to a charitable donation established by Lennar. Lennar is a builder. Does Lennar contribute to this charity? No, but they make every property owner pay for it. It's so stupid, but it's there. And so you could put that ahead of time. You could put buyer, or you could put a seller, or if checked buyer, obviously just read that seller if applicable, or just leave it as is, and then no one notices, and then the seller has to pay for it. And then the Lennar one, I think, is this additional fees. It depends on what they consider private transfer fees. So home warranty plan, HVAC, pool. If there's a pool, you're going to put pool, but really you're just going to put HVAC. You can do appliances. You can change this at any point, unless if the seller's paying for it. So if the seller pays for it, then obviously you can't pay. If the buyer's paying for it, they can add whatever the hell they want to add. There's different reps. For the sake of this practice, just put American Home Shield and put $650 as the standard amount. A 2-year, because it only lasts for a year, the warranty. A 2-year, like souped up version, I think is $1,500. So it's like the souped up version's $750 or $725. So then the best you can get is $1,500. I had a client get that because they weren't too sure about the roof, and the seller was willing to give them a credit, so they just bought a better home warranty. Other terms is where I was talking about. If you had to write anything specific, like seller to remove this stuff. Typically, you're going to do that after inspection, so don't worry about it now. Now, if you know this is a probate sale, I'm going to check probate addendum. Is a manufactured home, tenant occupied, all this other stuff, tenancy in common. That was in San Francisco, you're going to deal with that a lot. Stock corporate, like all that. If someone says there's a trust. Now, if there is a septic well or property, the propane, I'm going to do that because I want to specify how the propane gets divvied up because the seller already paid for it, but they're not going to use it. So usually, I just don't want to have to negotiate this later, and then it gets more complicated for my buyer. So I'm going to check that and put that addendum in place. If you forget to check one of these, if it ends up being the house is held in a trust, you always have to include the wildfire disaster advisory for every property in California. If you forget to check it and you don't include it, you can always include it later. Don't worry about it. We can always fix that stuff later. Now, the rest of this we can read on another note, but this is where you're going to read this is all disclosures and talking about all of this little stuff. Now, on the very bottom, just to finish this up. Oh man, down. Now, when you send this to be e-signed and you go through either DocuSign or AuthentiSign or DigiSign or whatever the free one is with this, they usually make this optional, and you need to make sure it's not, because even though it says optional, they don't prompt the buyer to initial that, and they need to. This is liquidated damages. You're agreeing to arbitration. If you get a lawyer as your buyer, they probably don't want to fill this out because they want to be able to sue the seller for more, but good luck getting your offer accepted. Once again, another conversation, I can explain this at a later date. It's just something to remember that this is arbitration and liquidated damages. If there's ever a lawsuit, we are agreeing, all of us, that we're going to arbitration first. So that's not as serious as court. And it just, once again, they can read that if they want. If my client, so if this is an entity buyer, obviously we're going to put there. Buyer, if there's more than two, so it's like, 3 people, 4 people, I'm going to check that and do an additional buyer, and the buyer will sign it, when you hit e-sign right over here. When they accept your offer, let's say, hey, they're going to check seller counter offer, backup offer, whatever. So yeah, this is it. There was a box that we missed that has to do with, this is contingent on the sale of the buyer's property. So that's one of these up here. Here we go. Sale of buyer's property. Sale of buyer's property is not a contingency unless checked here. So if they have a house to sell first, and that's a whole nother addendum, which we'll talk at a whole nother time. It's going to put this information at the very bottom for the brokerage and your information. I don't really worry about that. This is escrow instructions, but if they need to get a hold of us for some reason, but you don't have to put this. This is actually going to be my home address, since everyone's working remotely, or if you're watching this and we have an office at this point, then that's where that office address will go. But once again, you don't have to sign that. I, as the broker, or whoever is the managing broker, does not have to sign this. It is all you and your client, which is a good thing and bad thing. Ending with advisories. Buyer investigation advisory. You should do investigations. Fair Appraisal Act. I mean, there's all these just that are mandatory, and they include it at the end, and you have your client sign. So that is that. If you're watching this, a lot of you, I'm going to assign you some homework so that you can practice writing this offer. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.